Hi, how you doing? I'm Dr. Andrew Chappell, and today I'm going to talk to you about advanced training techniques. Listen guys, if you like this video, then please do hang around to the end. Check out some of the client transformations that we've done using these various different techniques as well. And if you feel like we can help you, then please do be sure to get in touch with us and to check out the rest of our content on YouTube and some of our other webinars as well. And as I said, don't be afraid to reach out to us as well. Okay, so I'm going to talk about advanced training techniques today. And this is a subject that I think a lot of people will be very familiar with, and they'll have implemented various different advanced training techniques themselves down the years, sometimes without actually being aware that they're doing these techniques. But advanced training techniques, it can be a very useful way to eke out that little bit more out of your training sessions, increase the intensity. They can be really fun as well, but also help you burst through plateaus and get the results, which is why we're all watching this webinar as well, because that's what we want to do. So let's get on with this presentation. So I am a championship bodybuilder. Here's myself here and my partner. Another bodybuilding pro like myself, WNBF pro, Steph Noble, and this is myself competing at the NABBA Universe. I am a doctor of nutrition. I'm very interested in bodybuilders, and a lot of my research has centered around bodybuilding and strategies that people utilize to get themselves in shape for competition. We always take an evidence-based approach with our athletes, and we always gather as much data as we possibly can, test and measure things to try and find the best sort of way to coach our individual athletes. If you're interested, you can check me out on PubMed. Here's a recent paper that I published just last year looking at the physiological effects of contest preparation on bodybuilders. Moving on from here are some clients that I've worked with in the recent past. So I'm not going to go through these all individually, but we took a team of 6 athletes out to take part in the WNBF World Championships in Las Vegas very, very recently. They all did very well. You can see here we won multiple pro cards as well, but we've also worked with athletes across multiple divisions, multiple categories, multiple ages, and you can see as well both sexes as well. At the same time as that, the Advanced Training Techniques webinar wouldn't be complete without mentioning as well the strength athletes that we've worked with as well. Most notably, probably Phil Roberts here, formerly England's Strongest Man and second at UK Strongest Man. We've got Simon Knowles, a well-known strongman in the strongman world as well, plus lots of other amateur strongmen and women as well at the same time, utilizing these different techniques that we're going to talk about on this webinar as well. And as I said right at the start, if you think that we can help you, then please be sure to get in touch with us as well. Okay, so what we're going to talk about in this particular session is the science of muscle building. What are advanced training techniques? When should I implement advanced training techniques, and then some of the issues surrounding advanced training techniques, because when we implement them, they are very stressful, they are very difficult to do, so we have to consider that as well at the same time. Okay, so how does muscle building happen? Well, hypertrophy, or metabolic stress, happens through multiple different pathways. Okay, so first off, I would say is we've got to place some mechanical stress on the muscle. So that comes from a combination of the resistance training and doing that at multiple different rep ranges. So you can see here, we'll look to try and implement 10 to 30 rep ranges. We can modify the rest periods. We can take things to muscular failure, and then we can place consistent tension on the muscles. We can also do other things. So we can restrict the blood flow, which increases the amount of pressure around the muscle. Obviously, when we do this, we have to utilize higher repetitions and use lower intensity. And then at the same time, we can also implement advanced training techniques. And this is what we're really talking about here with all-out effort. We can utilize things like interval-style training, so that's high output anaerobics, and that can obviously lead to muscle mass building as well with those short intervals. All of those things in combination, so that mechanical tension, all causes metabolic stress as well. So we get a buildup of lactic acid within our muscle. That's the pump that goes on. We exhaust our muscles' energy substrates, so the phosphates within the muscles, and then we change the pH within the muscle as well. So we get a buildup of these H+ ions as well at the same time. That continues to go on to create a hypoxic state within the muscle. So if we can't get enough oxygen to the muscle, we get this hypoxia taking place. We get cellular swelling. That's the pump as well. So we call it something called edema. All of this leads to a big milieu of metabolic and hormonal stress. So hormones get released, most notably testosterone, but there's also other things like glucagon. So we have to break down the muscle, or rather liver glycogen, and deliver that to the muscles. At the same time, we have to release IGF-1 as well. And all of this, because we're creating oxidative stress as well, will lead to reactive oxygen species being produced as well. So there's a whole lot of stuff combines together, and we can do it through multiple different pathways, I'm sure, or rather I hope you can appreciate here, which can lead to this muscle hypertrophy taking place as well. Other things happen as well though, so angiogenesis, so that's the creation of new vascular tissue, so we get more capillaries getting put in there because our body needs to adapt and deliver more oxygen to the muscles for next time. But we also get something called mitochondrial biogenesis as well, and that's the powerhouses of the cells which are responsible for utilizing oxygen as an energy substrate. So it's all a adaptation taking place in response to the exercise that we're doing. Now, this is another schematic of the same sort of idea. Up the top here, this says mechanical tension. So that's the tension that we're placing on the muscles. That leads to adaptations taking place within the central nervous system and the peripheral nervous system. That's the system that delivers the signals from the brain to the spinal cord and into the working muscles and back again. That causes our muscles to fire in sequence and generate muscular strength. And then we've also got the metabolic stress, which leads to all these growth factors being released as well, which results in muscle hypertrophy as well. And as muscles get larger, we often generate more muscular strength at the same time. So that's, roughly speaking, a very fast whistle-stop tour as to how we build muscle tissue. Now, the effect of resistance training on building muscle tissue is very individual. So, with this diagram here, and this particular research study, this is the variability in muscle size and strength gains after a unilateral resistance training program. So this is 12 weeks of bicep preacher curls, and it's 505 subjects, half of them men, half of them women. The black bars, they are the men, and then the white bars, they are the females. And the CSA, this is cross-sectional area change. So this is when we measure the actual bicep circumference itself. And you can see here, these are changes from baseline. So 0 is baseline, and then as we go along, you can see we've got 40, 50, 55% change in overall muscle mass, or the cross-sectional area. And then on this axis here, these are the subjects. So you can see here that most people are pulling around about the middle here. So we're getting improvements between 10 to 25 to 30% in muscle mass from 12 weeks of changing. But there are some people that get 40, 45% increases, and then there are some people down here that only get that sort of 5% increase in muscle mass as well. And really, the reason I'm showing you this is to show that everyone's response and reaction to muscle building is likely to be slightly different. The same is true when you look at the effect on strength gains. So this is the same group of people, same idea, but instead of cross-sectional area, it's an improvement in the 1 rep max strength. And you can see here that the data is actually quite skewed. So you see a sort of distribution which is skewed to the left. So most people are actually getting improvements between around about probably 20 to as much as probably 70%. The female lifters, though, actually a large majority of them are increasing their muscle strength by up to 100%. So you can see 14% of them increasing up at that much. But at the far end, again, you can see that the females here, some of them have actually managed to make gains up to around about 220% in their 1 repetition maximum. So again, huge variation on what you can expect in terms of your response to any sort of training. here as well. This is another study which looks at the gene expression of people taking part in an exercise trial and looking at the effect from low responders versus high responders. And what we're really seeing with this is you're looking at lean body mass gains from the high responders over a 12-week resistance training program. And you've got one group here which is making as much as 4.5 kilograms in terms of improvements to lean body mass, versus the other group there which is making an increase of around about 1 kilogram of lean body mass improvements. And these people can be broken down. This is 56 men within this study here, and it can be broken down, and you can look at gene expression here, and you can actually predict people that are going to be higher responders versus lower responders within this. So all of this is to say that although we've got those multiple factors which contribute towards muscle mass growth in here, and the quality of the training is going to really matter as well, you do see large variations in the amount of muscle mass that people build over the course of a training program, just because some people are genetically more inclined. This is, though, really what you can expect to get. And when we talk about training, we're very often always talking about average responses to training. And you can see within here that the majority of people are going to fall within the normal distribution. However, at the tail end, at the top percentiles of any sort of resistance training program, you do get some people who are in the top sort of 5 percentile of the population who are really going to make massive improvements in their muscle mass. However, it is all dependent on genetics and environmental stimulus, e.g. the type of training that you're doing and the type of nutritional support that you have as well in terms of your ability to improve your progress. So different programs might facilitate growth and improvements compared to other ones. If you're watching this, you probably are interested in fitness. You probably are some sort of bodybuilder as well. And most people who are interested in fitness and bodybuilding are already typically in this top 5 percentile of the population. Otherwise, they wouldn't be doing the types of activities that they're doing, because they've obviously got an aptitude for it already. So all of this is just to put that previous data into context of how we can muscle build. Okie dokie. So with all that in mind, one way in which you can potentially break through any potential training plateaus that might be in place are using things called advanced training techniques. And advanced training techniques are basically anything which modifies a typical set or extends a typical set. So a lot of us are used to doing 3 sets of 10 on a particular exercise, and then we move on to the next set. And you can do full sessions like that. Those programs, they work very well. They can be extremely effective. But as soon as we start to modify those sets and start to do things like cheat reps or force reps, or as soon as we start to do things like supersets or drop sets, this is we're modifying a regular set, we're extending the set, and this is what we'd call a advanced training technique. Now, with that in mind, there's lots of nuance as to how and when and why you might want to use these methods. But at the end of the day, what you're trying to do with these methods is to increase that metabolic stress that I talked about right away at the start, and increase the neurological stress compared to what you might be able to achieve just by doing straight sets. Yeah, so you're trying to create a different stimulus, and with using these methods, that stimulus can be very difficult for your muscles to react to if you're always doing different types of advanced training techniques. And people years ago used to describe this as the so-called muscle confusion technique. Usually when you're doing advanced training techniques, a lot of the time you're using isolation exercises or machines, although you can use compounds. It's just the thing you want to be bearing in mind with them is that you increase your propensity for injury. These movements are more complicated to do. They require much more technique. So the margin for error is greater. However, when it comes to strength-based training, you probably are utilizing compound exercises and using these advanced training techniques. As I mentioned right at the start here, they can be really useful for helping you burst through plateaus. So if you can't get past that certain weight you're trying to lift and you've been in 3 sets of 10 for a long time, then it can be a really good way to help you do that. They're challenging and they're fun as well. So I always recommend that people utilize advanced training techniques. So moving on from that. So there's lots of different advanced training techniques you can utilize. And with this particular presentation, a lot of you will be familiar with these techniques. So what I'm going to do is, once I do the summary of this particular webinar, I'm then going to go through all the advanced training techniques individually. So if you want to stop the video at that point, then I'll not be offended, and you can maybe dip in and out of this webinar at other points as well. So I've grouped these here into different sort of categories in terms of what I would call hypertrophy techniques and strength-based techniques. Although I want you to bear in mind that strength-based athletes will also use the hypertrophy techniques, and hypertrophy-based athletes will also utilize the strength techniques. So these are only very broad categories, and there's a lot of crossover I want you to consider as well, depending on the goal and what it is that you're trying to get out of the session. So different techniques that you've got are things that I would call circuits, so supersets, trisets, and giant sets, and that's where you do 2 exercises back to back and without any rest. And that's one thing that I'm really going to make clear on a lot of the hypertrophy-based techniques is there shouldn't be a point in which you rest if you're doing something like a superset. So if you're going to do a bicep curl alongside a cable curl, there should be no rest between the cable curl and the dumbbell curl when you're doing that. As soon as you put the dumbbells down, you should then be picking up the cable and going from there. As soon as you start to introduce a rest period within that, then you're losing a lot of the intensity that you'd otherwise would get from this type of training. That's a superset. You can utilize agonist and antagonist muscle groups, so you could do bicep curls and tricep extensions, or you can do biceps and biceps again. Likewise, a triset, that's where you do 3 exercises back to back, same sort of premise. You can do again alternate muscle groups, so you might want to do chest, back, and abdominals, or you might want to do 3 chest exercises back to back. Moving after that, we've got what we call a giant set, and that is where you're looking at doing 4 or more exercises back to back, and you can see why I've categorized this as circuits from here. But you shouldn't be resting until you've really completed those 4 or more exercises. Have your rest period, and then you start the cycle again. After that, we've got what I would describe as set extenders. So these are drop sets, partials, cheat sets, and assisted or force reps. A drop set, what you're going to do with that one is you're going to lift a weight that you're only going to be able to achieve between 5 and 6 repetitions with. You're then going to drop that weight by around about 20-30%. It works very well with a pin and a machine. And then you're going to try and continue the set to try and get another 5 or 6 reps. So you might have a total goal of trying to do 12 in mind. And again, like I said, you're wanting to create a large amount of metabolic stress. So you're wanting to make sure there's no rest between the sets. So you should literally going go, go. After that, we've got partials. So we do a set until the point where we can't manage to do any more repetitions with a full range of motion. So we then move to a limited range of motion after that. Cheat sets, that's where we might use a little bit of body English. Then we've got forced or assisted reps, whereby you might work with a spotter to help you eke out another couple of reps. We've got pump chasers. So the most famous example I can think of there is something called a matrix set. So that's where you break a movement down into different components. And from there, what you would then utilize is different sections, and then you'd go and finally complete a set after you've done it. After 2 sort of sections have been broken down, or 3 sections have been broken down, to complete the full set from their full range of motion. So a good example of that is bicep curl 21. So I hope I've explained that well enough. We've then got AMRAPs, so that's as many reps as you possibly can. You typically do these alongside backups after you've maybe completed a heavier lift, and then you want to focus more on the muscle connection or getting a pump. Blood flow restriction is where we wear a tourniquet to do our sets. And then moving on after that, we've got more strength-based techniques, I would say. So negatives, that's where we really focus on controlling the eccentric portion of a rep. Cluster sets, that's where we might break a set down into 3 or 4 separate components. Have a total rep scheme of trying to do maybe 10. And then from there, we maybe do 3 reps, take a 30-second rest, another 3 reps, take a 30-second rest, and then try and complete the 4 reps after that to do your set of 10. Rest pause is similar. So you maybe have to try and do 10 reps. You pause at the 8th rep, rack the weight, take 10 seconds rest, and try and eke out another 2 from there. And then finally, you've got support equipment sets, I would say. So this is where you might break a movement down with this concept called whole part whole. Try and improve, for example, on a squat, you might only squat half the way up against a pin, or you might do a box squat and go in the other direction. You can add bands and chains for the same sort of reasons. And then we can utilize elbow sleeves or knee wraps or knee sleeves as well to try and overload the muscle beyond what you would normally do. So these are our advanced and different training techniques. And I'm going to go through them all individually later on in this presentation. Okay, so the big question is really, when should you implement these methods? And no surprise here, I would say it really depends on the circumstances. What is it you're trying to achieve out of your training session? The other thing is, straight sets can be extremely effective. So you don't need to do a full session just using advanced training techniques. You can use only advanced training techniques for one exercise or two exercises, but you actually don't have to implement them at all, but they can be effective. Usually you're going to want to limit your advanced training technique to a final set that you're doing. So if you're choosing an exercise, you're usually going to utilize it on the last set of that exercise. So if you're doing bicep curls, you're not going to want to probably do a cheat reps for the whole way through those 3 sets. You're probably only going to want to utilize it on the end set to complete the set, with the goal of being that you can progress and get a good set out of that the following week. Or maybe you do. Maybe you want to do it for the full set. It really, again, it depends on your goal and what you're trying to get out of it. And that's the benefit and the beauty of working with someone like a coach like myself, so that we can utilize these techniques to try and make it specific to your own goal. Strength-based things, it's not unusual for you to implement them from your very first set. So you might do cluster sets immediately from the start. You might be doing partial movements from your very first exercise. Again, it's very circumstantial on this. They can reduce your workout time while maintaining great stimulus, but equally doing a lot of advanced training techniques can extend your workout time as well at the same time. These are very often performed at a very high rate of perceived exertion. So they're difficult, they're very challenging. You're going to be working a 10 out of 10 on this, and very often there's no reps in reserve, because you're really often pushing things to absolute failure, or past the point of absolute failure when you're utilizing these techniques. You're not going to have any reps in reserve, and as a consequence of that, if you're doing a lot of these things, you can accumulate a lot of fatigue quite quickly, and we have to consider that when we're utilizing these techniques. Okay, so here's an example of some advanced training techniques for leg training. So up here we've got a standard plan, and by all means pause this video and have a look at this later by yourself. You've then got a modified plan with 2 to 3 advanced training techniques. So you can see that the last set of this leg extension here is going to be a drop set. We've got a superset added in here. So this is seated and prone leg curls, which has been added in here. And then we've got calf raises in here. And the last set of this is going to be a partial. So we've implemented 3 advanced training techniques here, you can see. The previous workout scheme didn't have any. It was just straight sets, and it was 15 total sets. Because this is a superset, I've reduced the amount of sets that we're doing. Because this is a drop set, again, I've reduced the amount of total sets. So this has gone down in terms of the total amount of sets, but the amount of work which you're utilizing is probably slightly more than this program here, because you're doing 4 sets essentially here. You're doing an extra set on here because it's a drop set, you're extending it. And then on here, because you're doing partials, the amount of repetitions you're eventually going to end up doing is much, much greater as well. Thereafter that, here's what I would call a killer plan. It's a really large overreaching plan that you're doing on here, and it's an advanced training technique in every single exercise. I've also kept the total number of sets the same, and if we look at it, you can see I've kept the drop set in for leg extensions, I've kept the superset in here, and I've kept the partials in here. But for the leg press, I've added in a matrix style set. I've also reduced the amount of repetitions. And then for the squat, I've changed the repetitions here with the goal of 2 sets of 5, with the last set really being a back off set from here. So again, this is a really tough program. There's a lot more volume in this, and you'll probably find with this one that you're going to get a lot more DOMs for a greater number of days. And if you train like this consistently, it's going to be really important that you're implementing things like deloads alongside this program. Otherwise, again, fatigue's going to accumulate quite quickly. As I mentioned in the previous page here, all of this, the plan is to really try and allow you to advance week on week with your training. So you'll be doing that with straight sets, but when you start to include advanced training techniques into the mix, then what happens is the amount of stimulus that you're creating really does overload the muscle quite considerably. So this is what we call supercompensation modeling, and what we do is over here. If we do a training session, and the idea here is this straight line over here is homeostasis, so that's our body at rest, not changing, just normal function. We create an exercise stress, that causes our body to recover. We then compensate as a result of it. We then do the next exercise training session, create some stress, our body recovers, and then we've got a new baseline on here. So we get progressively stronger, we build more muscle mass. You can see this is what we're looking for. Super compensation, positive. We want to have a nice line like this, rather than this, which is a slight increase, but we want to get a little bit more out of it. If we consistently overtrain, then what happens is we struggle to really adapt to the exercise. We don't move forward, and where we implement a deload, this can allow us to progress from here. So we have to be very conscious of this, and this is one of the reasons why we often look to implement a phase of training whereby we take the foot off the gas a little bit so that we can continue to progress every so often. So that's why the deloading matters. Okay, so in terms of considerations, they might not be necessary to advance at all. So you don't need to do advanced training techniques in every session. If your legs are weak, maybe you only need to do advanced training techniques for there. Maybe the rest of your body, you don't need to do them. They increase the amount of stress in a training session, and that's we've just talked about deloads there. So you have to be conscious of junk volume. You maybe don't want to implement lots of advanced training techniques. Maybe there's only one or two you want to put in your particular session. You get a large amount of DOMs. Because you're training at extra high intensity, we have to be aware that the propensity for injury could go up, particularly if we're doing a lot of compound exercises. It might reduce the length of your exercise session, but also might increase the length as well. One of the problems that I always have with advanced training techniques is that it's difficult to gauge progress. So week on week, you might be lifting a heavier weight when you're doing a straight set system. But when it comes to doing things like the advanced training techniques, you're always using different loads, and it can be very difficult to gauge, are you actually progressing in that particular aspect? So are you able to lift more loads? So that's why it can be difficult as well. I always say a rule of thumb, 2 to 3 advanced training techniques is probably enough. If you do more than that, then you do get a lot of muscle fatigue. With all that in mind, they can be great for helping you go through plateaus. They are fun, there's no doubt. We all enjoy doing an advanced training technique as well. At the same time, you're going to be using different advanced training techniques, probably if you're training for strength compared to if you're doing for hypertrophy, although there is a lot of crossover as well. And then find your favorite ones and then implement them. Find the ones which are most useful for you to help you to progress with your goals. I've, broadly speaking, separated ones that I think are strength goals and hypertrophy-based ones. Your ideas on that may be slightly different, but I would say the way I broadly split it, I would utilize more one rather than another, depending on my goal of hypertrophy or strength. Okay, with all that in mind, if you want to at this point pause the video and stop watching, then I'm more than happy for you to do that. Like I said right at the start though, if you believe that we can help you and that you're interested in working with a coach and that this has inspired you to think how we can utilize these different techniques, then please do reach out, get in touch. Otherwise, if you'd like, I'm just going to go through the various different hypertrophy-based techniques now and how to implement them all individually. Okay, so we've got supersets, trisets, and giant sets. And I think the big mistake that people often make on this is that they rest between these exercises. So one thing that you're going to utilize for a superset is it's 2 exercises back to back. In this case, it might be the bicep curl, just in a regular standing one with a dumbbell, and then you might then go on and do straight into the hammer curl, or vice versa. These can be great for getting a pump. That's really what happens when you do this. You get a lot of metabolic fatigue on this, and I've mentioned already, you can mix up. You could do biceps and triceps, you could do chest and back, you could do quads and hamstrings. It's really up to yourself how you utilize it, and it's a very popular technique that you see a lot of PTs utilizing to get a good pump with their clients. Trisets, same idea, 3 exercises back to back. Giant sets, it's 4 or more exercises back to back, and it's usually on the same muscle group as well. A great giant set that I've done years is squat, hack squat, leg press, leg extension. That's a very good one. And if you want to make it even more intense, then do sissy squat as well. So all of them back to back on there, and you can get that done very, very quickly. We've got drop sets and partials. So drop sets, like I say, they work very well if you've got training partners, if you're doing plate loaded equipment. But if you're working by yourself, then pin loading machines, it's very easy just to take a pin out and then put it in a different position in a machine. Great for getting a pump. You can really fatigue the muscle, and then you can extend the set as well at the same time, doing drop sets and partials onto the next week. So if you achieve 6 reps one week, you might do a drop set, and that might allow you to do 7 or 8 the next week. Same is true for partials. Again, the big mistake that people make is that they rest between their drop sets. So they'll do a leg extension, complete the set, have a little 10 to 20 second rest, and then drop the pin, and then they'll go again. That's not the way to do it. What you're really looking to do is just to go and then go again. The other mistake that people make is that they do too many reps. So you should really be looking at between around about 10 to 12 reps, probably no more than 15 reps, because once you start doing any more than that, then really you're not creating much of a stimulus. You're just working for the sake of it. So have that goal in mind of the amount of reps you want to do. And a good idea is maybe to do between 5 and 6, drop the weight 20 to 30%, and then do another 5 or 6 from there. After that, we've got partials. So a good example might be if you're doing bicep curls here. We've got the full range of motion goes all the way up. But once you get to the end of the set, you might not be able to complete that full range of motion anymore. And you might decide that I'm only going to work between 50 degrees and 130 to try and complete the sets from here, or 100 degrees and 130, because if I go beyond that, I'll not be able to perform any repetitions. And you'll do quite high reps on this. So if your set was a goal of say 10, you might then do another 10 partials just shortly thereafter that. Again, great for extending the set, really good for getting a pump and fatiguing the muscle just that little bit more. We've got cheat sets and assisted or force reps. So this is whereby a cheat set, we might use a little bit of extra body language on here. Again, really good for extending a set, getting that little bit extra pump, fatiguing the muscle, but also trying to progress to the next week where we might want to try and complete the set without using that little bit of body English. Really, you should be utilizing no more than 3 reps on a cheat set, because if you are, the weight is probably too heavy. A good bit of advice is often to use 2 repetitions in terms of your cheats. Likewise, when it comes to force reps, classic example here is the bench press, and that's where your training partner is going to help you eke out those extra 2 repetitions. No more than 2 really is a good idea. One if you're really training for strength based on here. And the problem with these types of techniques is that injury potential can be a lot higher once you start to utilize these sort of different techniques from here. And that's why it's important not to go any more than 2 assisted reps from here as well. But these are really useful because they can help you get those extra reps on the next week's worth of training. These are probably 2 of the most common techniques you'll see people utilizing in the gym. After that, we've got a matrix set. So I described this briefly earlier on. The goal of this is really to pump the muscles, get fatigue into the muscles. So you'll break a movement down into partials, either 2 or 3 movements. Bicep curls 21s, this is a classic. So you might do 7 at the top of the movement, bicep curls, so that top range of motion, 7 at the bottom of the movement, and then you might do 7 completing the movement from there. Or you could break it down into 3 sections, with a 4th section being the full range of motion as well. It can be very useful for helping you work on weaknesses in your lifting, because you're having to isolate the movement, and you're really focusing on that area where you might be weaker compared to the movement where you might be potentially stronger. You often get a great pump doing this as well. AMRAPs, same idea. So you're really dropping the weight back after you've done a heavy set, and you're going for 15 to 25 reps. Because you're doing that many reps, this starts to become really useful for power training. It also starts to become very useful for, again, developing a good mind-muscle connection where you're going very heavier before, but also training those weaker portions of the movement as well, where you maybe were not focusing on quite as much when you're going quite as heavy as well. So all very useful. Again, create a large amounts of metabolic stress and a different type of stress on the muscle compared to the heavier set that you were maybe doing before on your back off or your AMRAP set as well. So big things is really be cautious around the compounding exercises, but a great AMRAP is a squat. So after you've gone very heavy, for 5 or 6 reps, dropping it back to 20 repetitions for as many reps as possible can be a great way to get a pump and also cause a completely different type of metabolic stress. Okay, blood flow restriction type training. So there's a graphic here behind of someone doing leg extensions, and you can just see it faintly here. This is someone, they've wrapped knee wraps around their thighs to limit the amount of blood flow going to their legs. The same is true if you put it on your biceps, so you might put it around your arms, again to create a greater metabolic stress on the arms. The idea is that you limit the amount of blood going to the working muscle with this tourniquet. That creates that ischemic state, and if you remember right back to the start, that ischemic state is the thing which really can help cause stress and cause that muscle adaptation to take place. Originally, this was developed to help people who were recovering from injuries, but it can be utilized alongside people who are using deloads at the same time. You get large amounts of reactive oxygen species, large amounts of oxygen deficits, large amounts of lactic acid. You use very light loads and much higher repetitions, and it hurts. And it's a different way though, which you can get stimulus to the muscles. Okay, so those are the hypertrophy-based techniques. Strength-based techniques now. And here's some great athletes that ProPrep has been fortunate enough to work with down the years. And again, we've utilised these techniques with all our strongmen athletes, but also our bodybuilders as well at the same time. So here's a couple of them joking about at a strongman event that we went to last year. Okay, so you've got negative sets, clusters, and rest pauses. And the goal of really these is to overload the central nervous system and overload the muscle with amount of weight that you would not normally be able to lift, so that you can then utilize it as part of your particular competition, and then so that you can then progress to the next week lifting as well. You've got negatives, and that's where you do an eccentric lift. So you might want to try and squat 300 kilos. If you've never had to lift that weight before, you might decide, okay, I'm going to put 320 kilograms on my back, take it out the rack, and then squat down a tiny little partial, and then you've taken a negative there from there, and then you're going to put it back in the rack just so you can feel it. You might do it on a bench press, take it down to your chest, a really heavy weight that's 110 to 120% of your 1 rep max, then get a training partner to lift it off of you from there. These create large amounts of muscle damage. I wouldn't really recommend doing any more than 3 repetitions while you're doing it, because the risk of injury is very, very high, but it can be a really useful technique to help you overload as well. Cluster sets, I mentioned how to do them briefly, but you might perhaps try to do 10 repetitions in total. You might go 4 reps, 30 seconds rest, 3 reps, 30 seconds rest, and 3 reps, and then have your 3 to 5 minutes rest thereafter that to try and complete your set of 10 repetitions. This works on the basis that you're trying to recover some of that ATP you might have utilized within your muscles, and then by doing that, you can then get the extra repetition. So great if you're trying to build strength in a particular rep range. A rest pause really works in a similar way from there. So you might try and do 10 reps, get to the 8th rep, get that 10-second rest, rack the weight, then do that 10-second rest again, then rack the weight from there. So it can be very useful techniques for guys getting much stronger. In terms of support equipment and things that you can utilize as well, people often use this stuff associated with hypertrophy training as well. What we're really talking about is people maybe doing partials, bands and chains, and really utilizing sleeves. So here we've got Connor the Barbarian here. He's doing axle bar press from the floor to overhead. And one movement that we practiced with him was to practice just this belt clean component with a heavy weight, get it up to his waist, and then from the deadlift component, then clean it up to his shoulders without doing any of the pressing at all. And then on our session, we were doing lots of pressing separately to try and get better at that whole movement, and then combine it again so that we could then utilize it in competitions. We call that whole part whole. And a lot of people will do this in the gym. They'll do it with things like box squats. They'll do it with block pulls or deficit deadlifts to try and work on specific weaknesses and weak points in a particular movement. And then bodybuilders might utilize it to try and work on particular weaknesses within a muscle group as well. You do tend to overload really at that specific point that you're trying to utilize, and it's very often a weak point, like I say, that you're trying to get over. The use of bands and chains, it's the very same idea. You're trying to overload a specific area of the lift, and perhaps, for example, you're very good at lifting a weight from the floor, but you're not very good at lowering it back down. So maybe what you would do is put some rubber bands over the top of a particular lift, cause that little bit of instability, and then as you lift the weight, the resistance gets greater because the rubber band is stretching. So you're really training that part of the movement, and then as you put it down, the load is reducing as well. And again, overloading the part which you're very good at and allowing you to still keep progressing without putting any extra emphasis on the part that you're perhaps not as good at. When it comes to strongman, very often we wear support equipment. So people will use things like knee wraps, knee sleeves, double ply, triple ply equipment which are elasticated to allow them to lift that a little bit more. And the idea is we're utilizing these things so that when it comes to the actual competition itself, we maybe don't either need to wear them if it's powerlifting, or we utilize these bits of equipment so that we can lift even more for a competition itself. So we always really want to train raw as possible, and then when we get closer to competitions, we add the support equipment so we can lift even more within the actual event as well. The big thing about these techniques, though, guys, is that you really do cause a lot of stress to the central nervous system. There is a greater chance of injury, so we have to be very aware of this when we're utilizing these techniques for training. Okay, folks, I hope you found that interesting. As I said right at the start of this webinar, if this is information that you think is useful and you can utilize it, then please, by all means, go ahead and use it. If you're unsure about how to utilize these techniques and you think that, okay, Andy's someone that can help me get myself in shape or get me over to my goal, then please, as I said before, do get in touch, reach out to us. We'd love to hear from you. Please do check us out on our Instagram. That's ProPrepCoaching. I'm Fueled by Scott Soates, and check out the WNBF UK page as well, where we do our bodybuilding competitions. Thank you very much for all your attention. I hope you found this useful. And if you do have any other ideas, suggestions, videos that you'd like me to make, then as always, please do get in touch. Okay, I'm Dr. Andrew Chabelle. Thank you for your time. Ciao.